Hello and welcome to Being Prodigy. Now put on your headphones and start learning. To get special study material, just contact us through the link in the description.
The nationalist movement in Indochina Vietnam gained formal independence in 1945, before India, but it took another 3 decades of fighting before the Republic of Vietnam was formed. This chapter on Indochina will introduce you to one of the important states of the peninsula, namely, Vietnam. Nationalism in Indochina developed in a colonial context. The knitting together of a modern Vietnamese nation that brought the different communities together was in part the result of colonization, but, as importantly, it was shaped by the struggle against colonial domination. If you see the historical experience of Indochina in relation to that of India, you will discover important differences in the way colonial empires functioned and the anti-imperial movement developed. By looking at such differences and similarities, you can understand the variety of ways in which nationalism has developed and shaped the contemporary world. Emerging from the shadow of China, Indochina comprises the modern countries of Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia. See Figure 1. Its early history shows many different groups of people living in this area under the shadow of the powerful Empire of China. Even when an independent country was established in what is now northern and central Vietnam, its rulers continued to maintain the Chinese system of government as well as Chinese culture. Vietnam was also linked to what has been called the Maritime Silk Route that brought in goods, people and ideas. Other networks of trade connected it to the hinterlands where non-Vietnamese peoples such as the Khmer Cambodians lived. Colonial domination and resistance. The colonization of Vietnam by the French brought the people of the country into conflict with the colonizers in all areas of life. The most visible form of French control was military and economic domination, but the French also built a system that tried to reshape the culture of the Vietnamese. Nationalism in Vietnam emerged through the efforts of different sections of society to fight against the French and all they represented. French troops landed in Vietnam in 1858, and by the mid-1880s they had established a firm grip over the northern region. After the Franco-Chinese War, the French assumed control of Tonkin and Annam. In 1887, French Indochina was formed. In the following decades, the French sought to consolidate their position, and people in Vietnam began reflecting on the nature of the loss that Vietnam was suffering.
This is Being Prodigy. To get special study material, just contact us through the link in the description, and please subscribe to show your support.
Nationalist resistance developed out of this reflection. The famous blind poet Nguyen Dinh Chu, 1822–1888, bemoaned what was happening to his country. "I would rather face eternal darkness than see the faces of traitors. I would rather see no man than encounter one man's suffering. I would rather see nothing than witness the dismembering of the country in decline." Why the French thought colonies necessary. Colonies were considered essential to supply natural resources and other essential goods. Like other Western nations, France also thought it was the mission of the advanced European countries to bring the benefits of civilization to backward peoples. The French began by building canals and draining lands in the Mekong Delta to increase cultivation. The vast system of irrigation works, canals and earthworks, built mainly with forced labor, increased rice production and allowed the export of rice to the international market. The area under rice cultivation went up from 274,000 hectares in 1873 to 1.1 million hectares in 1900 and 2.2 million in 1930. Vietnam exported 2/3 of its rice production and by 1931 had become the third largest exporter of rice in the world. This was followed by infrastructure projects to help transport goods for trade, move military garrisons and control the entire region. Construction of a trans-Indochina rail network that would link the northern and southern parts of Vietnam and China was begun. This final link with Yan'an in China was completed by 1910. The second line was also built, linking Vietnam to Siam, as Thailand was then called, via the Cambodian capital of Phnom Penh. By the 1920s, to ensure higher levels of profit for their businesses, French business interests were pressurizing the government in Vietnam to develop the infrastructure further. Should colonies be developed? Everyone agreed that colonies had to serve the interests of the mother country. But the question was, how? Some like Paul Barnard, an influential writer and policymaker, strongly believed that the economy of the colonies needed to be developed. He argued that the purpose of acquiring colonies was to make profits. If the economy was developed and the standard of living of the people improved, they would buy more goods. The market would consequently expand, leading to better profits for French business.
This is Being Prodigy. To get special study material, just contact us through the link in the description. And please subscribe to show your support.
Bernard suggested that there were several barriers to economic growth in Vietnam: high population levels, low agricultural productivity, and extensive indebtedness amongst the peasants. To reduce rural poverty and increase agricultural productivity, it was necessary to carry out land reforms as the Japanese had done in the 1890s. However, this could not ensure sufficient employment. As the experience of Japan showed, industrialization would be essential to create more jobs. The colonial economy in Vietnam was, however, primarily based on rice cultivation and rubber plantations owned by the French and a small Vietnamese elite. Rail import facilities were set up to service this sector. Indentured Vietnamese labor was widely used in the rubber plantations. The French, contrary to what Bernard would have liked, did little to industrialize the economy. The dilemma of colonial education. French colonization was not based only on economic exploitation. It was also driven by the idea of a civilizing mission. Like the British in India, the French claimed that they were bringing modern civilization to the Vietnamese. They took for granted that Europe had developed the most advanced civilization, so it became the duty of the Europeans to introduce these modern ideas to the colony, even if this meant destroying local cultures, religions, and traditions, because these were seen as outdated and prevented modern development. Education was seen as one way to civilize the native, but in order to educate them, the French had to resolve a dilemma. How far were the Vietnamese to be educated? The French needed an educated local labor force, but they feared that education might create problems. Once educated, the Vietnamese may begin to question colonial domination.
This is Being Prodigy. To get special study material, just contact us through the link in the description. And please subscribe to show your support.
Moreover, French citizens living in Vietnam, called colons, began fearing that they might lose their jobs as teachers, shopkeepers, policemen, to the educated Vietnamese. So they opposed policies that would give the Vietnamese full access to French education. Talking modern, the French were faced with yet another problem in the sphere of education. The elites in Vietnam were powerfully influenced by Chinese culture. To consolidate their power, the French had to counter this Chinese influence, so they systematically dismantled the traditional educational system and established French schools for the Vietnamese. But this was not easy. Chinese, the language used by the elites so far, had to be replaced. But what was to take its place? Was the language to be Vietnamese or French? There were two broad opinions on this question. Some policymakers emphasized the need to use the French language as the medium of instruction. By learning the language, they felt, the Vietnamese would be introduced to the culture and civilization of France. This would help create an Asiatic France solidly tied to European France. The educated people in Vietnam would respect French sentiments and ideals, see the superiority of French culture, and work for the French. Others were opposed to French being the only medium of instruction. They suggested that Vietnamese be taught in lower classes and French in the higher classes. However, only the Vietnamese elite, comprising a small fraction of the population, could enroll in the schools, and only a few among those admitted ultimately passed the school-leaving examination. This was largely because of a deliberate policy of failing students, particularly in the final year, so that they could not qualify for the better-paid jobs. Usually, as many as 2/3 of the students failed. In 1925, in a population of 17 million, there were less than 400 who passed the examination. School textbooks glorified the French and justified colonial rule. The Vietnamese were represented as primitive and backward, capable of manual labor but not of intellectual reflection. They could work in the fields but not rule themselves. They were skilled copyists but not creative. School children were told that only French rule could ensure peace in Vietnam. Since the establishment of French rule, the Vietnamese peasant no longer lives in constant terror of pirates. Calm is complete, and the peasant can work with a good heart. Looking modern, the Tonkin Free School was started in 1907 to provide a Western-style education. This education included classes in science, hygiene and French, These classes were held in the evening and had to be paid for separately. The school's approach to what it means to be modern is a good example of the thinking prevalent at that time. It was not enough to learn science and Western ideas.
This is Being Prodigy. To get special study material, just contact us through the link in the description. And please subscribe to show your support.
The school encouraged the adoption of Western styles such as having a short haircut. For the Vietnamese, this meant a major break with their own identity since they traditionally kept long hair. To underline the importance of a total change, there was even a haircutting chant. Resistance in schools. Teachers and students did not blindly follow the curriculum. Sometimes there was open opposition, at other times there was silent resistance. As the numbers of Vietnamese teachers increased in the lower classes, it became difficult to control what was actually taught. While teaching, Vietnamese teachers quietly modified the text and criticized what was stated. In 1926, a major protest erupted in the Saigon Native Girls' School. A Vietnamese girl sitting in one of the front seats was asked to move to the back of the class and allow a local French student to occupy the front bench. She refused. The principal, also a French people in the colonies, expelled her. When angry students protested, they too were expelled, leading to a further spread of open protests. Seeing the situation getting out of control, the government forced the school to take the students back. The principal reluctantly agreed but warned the students, "I will crush all Vietnamese under my feet. Ah, you wish my deportation? Know well that I will leave only after I am assured Vietnamese no longer inhabit Indochina." Elsewhere, students fought against the colonial government's efforts to prevent the Vietnamese from qualifying for white-collar jobs. They were inspired by patriotic feelings and the conviction that it was the duty of the educated to fight for the benefit of society. This brought them into conflict with the French as well as the traditional elite, since both saw their positions threatened.
This is Being Prodigy. To get special study material, just contact us through the link in the description. And please subscribe to show your support. Thank you and happy learning.